In this lesson, we're going to be modeling the final walls and glazing around the master bedroom. So we're talking about this room at the top of the house. It is also the room with the best view. It's got a huge terrace in front of it. It's got a private pool, a lap pool along the edge of the balcony, and so forth. So it's quite an exciting space to model and to create, and especially to visualize. So what I'm going to do in this lesson, since most of what I'm going to be doing is a repetition of other lessons that we have already done earlier on in this course, is I'm going to basically be pausing the video throughout this lesson so that you just get snapshots of small pieces of the workflow as I model this. So again, if there are any points that you think that you are missing by me putting the video on pause, just go back in this course to the correct lesson where you will see either that we are modeling the walls or the windows, since everything I'm doing in this lesson has already been covered earlier on in the course. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the upper level floor plan, isolate it, and then in plan view I'm going to start drawing a spline just covering the outside edge of this entire wall. So right now I'm going to pause it, and I'm going to be pausing again further on in the lesson. So just hang on with me as you see a snapshot view of this entire workflow speeded up for you. So now that spline has been drawn, and what I wanted to point out is that over here we never had any point to snap onto, since we never had a line in our CAD plans showing us where the top edge of this wall was arriving. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this point that I created randomly, just snapping onto any close object, and I'm going to manually type in the coordinates. So over here, this is the edge of the wall, the correct area or the correct coordinate for the Y value. So I'm just going to type in Control-C on my keyboard and paste that value into the other vertex. And I'm going to do the same thing for the X here. I'm going to take this, press copy, choose the other vertex, and paste and enter. So that will basically manually copy paste the X and the Y coordinates from other areas on the wall. And this is something that I do quite often in my workflow, where I just make sure that every point is in the right X or Y or even Z coordinate. So now we can go and extrude this spline upwards. So EXT enter. We also don't need to cap the beginning or the end, since it's going to be just a wall object. And let's go and now add an editable poly modifier onto it. And looking at your front view, so in other words from the front of the building, you can press F on your keyboard. I'm just manually going to slide this up until I see that it's at the right height. So it's going to be 10.4 meters. You can see that that's all lining up nicely and neatly. And we can now go and add an edge, or in other words an extra line running horizontally. I'm going to make sure that this is crossing. I'm going to select all of the verticals. So right now you may not see it, so let's look in perspective view. All of those verticals have been selected. I'm going to right click, connect once, and then I'm going to move this up to be the right height. So I can again go into my front view and then just slide this upwards until I see that that is lining up with the top of the window frames. So that's going to be 9.6 meters. Now what you'll see is that this portion of the wall that we have here is actually in the same place as this wall here. So you can actually choose to now delete this part of the wall, since you don't want to have the two inside their own space together occupying the same place. We can also delete these two, since they are the main glazed areas, and we can also delete this, which is the entrance into our building. So with all of that done, this is the basic outer shell. We now add a shell modifier, and it's an internal amount of 0.3 meters, and we can just make sure that straighten corners is turned on. If you see that there is any odd shading going on, that is from the smoothing groups. Sometimes whether the auto smooth edge is on or off, you still get that odd shading. For instance, this is too dark. To undo that, you can add another edit poly modifier, select your polygon, type Control A on your keyboard, and scroll all the way down, and then just hit the clear all button to your poly smoothing groups. So that will basically just remove any similarly ID'd smoothing groups on to adjacent polys. So let's go ahead now and do the next step, which is going to be outlining all the internal walls. And again, I'm going to do the same process where I isolate this selection, and in plan I'm going to trace them. So again, I'm going to pause the video now, and we're going to get back to the video once all of those splines are drawn and extruded. So now we're looking at these internal walls that have been drawn with their individual splines. All of those splines have been attached. They have been extruded up vertically, and I've used an editable poly modifier just to come in and flip a few of the polys. So you just select on the poly and then press the flip button if you see that any of them are facing inwards instead of outwards. Then also within the editable poly modifier, I just adjusted the vertical height of these vertices at the top to line up with the underside of the slab so that I read off the CAD plans. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to model up the frame that we have in this portion of the wall, and I'm going to do that from scratch. I could also look at taking or recycling an existing portion of a window frame, so there's nothing wrong with doing that as well. So since that is obviously an option, let's just go ahead and try that out. We can take an existing window, copy it, and then turn it by 90 degrees, making sure that you have your angle snap on. And you can then move it into place. When with your CAD plan selected, you can isolate your selection, and you can just snap it into the exact position, and then make any local changes to it if you need to. So for example, here I can see that I need to change the position of some of these frames, so I'm going to do that. I can also see from the CAD plan that I have 1, 2, 3 internal vertical frames, so I'm going to just delete 2 of them. Since this, I would like to keep this vertical frame with the 45-degree angle. I'd like to keep that in place, so I'm just going to delete these. I'm now going to delete these individual edges by selecting them like so. I'm going to do the same thing here. And then lastly, once that is removed, just right click, remove that, select the vertices, select all of them, and right click and remove. So that'll basically just simplify your object. I'm now going to take these and slide them across, and I can now just use my snap to go and snap these points into the right position. So this is a way of doing it instead of modeling it from scratch, as I mentioned in the beginning, and it often is the easiest method since all of your other elements in your modifier stack are already going to be there. So your shell and etc., all of that will be there. Now you'll see in this case that we can't necessarily work on the line anymore because we've done so much work to the editable poly. So there's no real point in keeping this history here. So you can right click on that and just choose collapse to, which means that you can work on the editable poly as the lowest object in your modifier list. So once you are happy that all of your individual points are correct on plan, then you can start working on the glass, and the glass will be exactly the same process. I'm going to choose one of them. I'm going to type in Control-I to delete the rest, and I'm just going to move these vertices to be in the right position. And I'm going to do all of that by eye in the quickest way possible. So the same way that I've done this, I'm now going to do the last portion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these frames at the bottom, which are all in the same size, but they might have a different height, and I'm going to copy them and move them into this position. So at this point, I'm going to pause the video again, and then just come back to it once we've copied, rotated, and moved these frames into the right place. So now just to finish off the lesson, you'll see that the last bit of glazing has been added. So it is quite time consuming to get everything looking absolutely right. So it took about 15-20 minutes to get that adjusted. So if you do find that something's maybe too complicated, you always have the choice of redoing it from scratch. But you can also, to speeden things up, you can look at the modifiers that you used in other objects that are similar. For example, if you know that your splines are all correct, you can then just copy and paste that sweep modifier over to your new objects so that everything has the same properties and sizes, especially dimensions to it. So that can be a speedy tip for you if it does help in your scenario. So I'm going to end the lesson over here. We're basically done doing the walls and the glazing for the master bedroom. What we're going to do in the next lesson is we're going to look at how we can do the roof slab for the entire building, and then after that we'll start finishing off the building, looking at some of the better details. For example, we have the balustrade to do, we have the pool on the upper terrace to do, as well as the pool down by the garden. So all of that will be done in the next couple of lessons.